Move into some other things of that nature. All right. Now, when Johnson becomes president, there he has to finish out the last of his term, and he really kind of carries the torch for Kennedy. We have the Economic Opportunity Act, we have the Civil Rights Act of '64, and these are ideas that Kennedy had. And so we have to really get these understood. Now, I'm not covering the Civil Rights Act here, because I'll cover it more in the Civil Rights era, and so there's a lot more to go through that, right? But Johnson will pass the Economic Opportunity Act. Basically, they looked at civil rights and they determined that there were a lot of outlying factors, poverty being the biggest one, and no chances. So the Economic Opportunity Act sets up the Economic Opportunity Commission, and this is to make sure that, regardless of race, everyone is given an opportunity to a good job. Now, many people believe that this is the beginning of affirmative action, which we'll get into. Civil rights would provide people who have once been a downtrodden member of society an advantage, if you will, in achieving a job, and some people say not necessarily an advantage, but just a foot in the door. We'll move into that later on. Okay. Now, as he's getting ready to run for re-election, I guess I need to cover this first. But the Economic Opportunity Act was spurred by an author by the name of Michael Harrington. And Michael Harrington said there was poverty, and so we'll get him in War on Poverty as well. Now, one of the interesting of all time commercials, and I'm going to let you see this here in a second, it's called the Daisy Girl commercial. It airs one time, and it freaks people out so bad, and it makes sure that Johnson will win. Here you go. Now they tell you here the Daisy Girl is Monique Corozillas. So let's watch this. This isn't long.
To go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November.
So that is the Daisy Girl commercial. Airs one time. In the countdown, you hear his opponent. His name is Barry Goldwater, and Barry Goldwater actively promoted and went against limited test ban treaty. He felt that it was necessary to increase the missile gap, things of that nature. Now, why is this such a big deal? In '62, if you remember, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis where we came within 15 minutes of being blown off the face of the planet, and nobody who's listening to this now would have existed. Maybe some older people, but there wouldn't be anybody. Now, he follows this up with this one. I'm not going to show you this one. Johnson calls this one the Ice Cream Girl. And so what happens here is she's eating an ice cream cone, and it said, you need calcium, but you don't need any of these bombs. And they dumb it down to a level of a little girl. They say, you know what the bombs do? They can make you die. Duh. But the main thing here was to get attacks, if you will, against Barry Goldwater. This is Barry Goldwater. And so with this in mind, Johnson wins pretty easily, if you can't tell. Everyone is freaked out about an explosion, an accident, if you will. And so Johnson does win. Now, Johnson is now allowed to introduce his domestic policy, not Kennedy's, but his. He calls it the Great Society. Okay? Now, the Great Society has to do with creating America and getting rid of poverty. And you can tell here this is the book that sparked the war on poverty. Now, Michael Harrington had gone and visited the other America in this affluency, if you remember that, where people had money, and he saw that a lot of people didn't have it, and so he wanted to address this. This is the second largest overreaching domestic program set we've ever had, only second to the New Deal. And a lot of these programs are still around today, and a lot of people have actually been affected by them. So let's talk about the Great Society. The first thing is you declare a war on poverty. Okay? Now, poverty happens in 1964 in his inaugural address, and people say, well, how can you declare poverty on something that isn't real? How do you do that? Well, if we look here, the old way of doing things, if you will, was to tell them to keep working. Eventually, you'll get out of that hole. Well, if this man keeps digging himself in the hole, he's going to keep going further. So Johnson will enact some programs to try to eliminate the factors of poverty. But war on factors of poverty isn't as intense as war on poverty. Now, 3 I want to talk about real quick. The first one is Head Start. If you have someone and you can ask your parents if you want to, preschool is expensive. Now, some kids aren't able to afford preschool, and when they go to kindergarten, they're behind other kids. And so the question was, should these inherently kids who are going to constantly be behind and not get a good job not have a chance because they can't pay for it? Johnson said no. Congress said no. And so they have Head Start. And this is to give poor, underprivileged preschoolers a chance to go to a preschool and to have a better way of doing things, okay? Now, the next 2 I call the Medi-Cousins, if you will. There's Medicare and there's Medicaid. Now, I remember these in the last 4 letters of each one. It's probably the easiest way to do it. Medicare, we're told in life that you care for your elderly. You care for the people who are retired. So Medicare mainly affects elderly. My father has type 2 diabetes, which is, one with insulin, and part of his insulin is covered through Medicare Part D. And I don't know what the D is for. It could be diabetes, could just be Part D. I don't know. Sorry. But if you remember, care for the elderly, this is health insurance or health benefits, if you will, for elderly. Now, the other one is Medicaid. And so let's think about CAID here, or aid, if you will. Band-Aids don't help you heal things, right? It's mainly just a soothing pacifier to get past things, if you will. To sit there and go, ooh, I have something on, I don't see the blood, I don't see the cut, I'm going to be okay. Well, you're going to be okay anyway, as long as you take care of it and clean it and things like that. Now, a child is the one who really wants that Band-Aid, right? Wants that protection. So I like you to remember Medicaid as a Band-Aid, and who would want that? Mainly a kid. Medicaid is for poor families, mainly ones with a lot of kids, single mothers, disabled, all those things, okay? Now, it comes a good part to bring this up as well. Johnson is another big liberal, all right? Now, liberals, I've told you before, are generally of the Democratic Party. They believe in helping out general welfare as opposed to big business. They will pass tons of programs. And generally, they come in an era where there is a problem, and they decide they want to solve it. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to the first really progressive liberal presidents, the progressives. We had the problem of industrialization, urbanization, and Teddy Roosevelt issued all these sweeping changes, right? Then we have the problem of the Great Depression. We have FDR come in with his New Deal. We have here the question of poverty and of chances, and Johnson comes in and creates the Great Society. And most notably, within recent years, there was an issue about paying for health care, and President Obama passed, or helped to get passed, if you will, what is slangily termed Obamacare, or affordable health care. So liberals believe that passing programs through government action, the government needs to act to fix things, whereas conservatives or Republicans basically believe that it's part of a cycle, it's going to work itself out. But if you get the money in debt from the American government, it's not really going to work out. All right?